Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Today we are going to be revisiting the case of Kouri Richins and going over the frankly ridiculous updates there have been since we covered this story last year. The amount of new and strange information that has been brought to light regarding this particular trial is absurd, and of course at the center of all of it is Kouri. I'll leave our previous coverage of this case in the description box down below, as this is the fourth video we've made. However, because it's been so long since our initial video, I'll be going over all the relevant information. For those of you who never watched our initial coverage, or for those of you who simply need a refresher, Kouri Richins is the Utah mother of three who killed her husband, then seemingly wrote a children's book about grief. I say seemingly because it's now been confirmed that the children's book was ghostwritten, and she did practically no work on it, besides doing a round of interviews about how and why she wrote it. Prior to the death of Eric Richins, Kouri's life seemed perfect. She purported to have a thriving real estate business, where she flipped houses. Her relationship with her husband was as good as it had ever been, and she had just closed on a new $1 million mansion that she had planned to fix up and move into. However, this was all far from the truth. Kouri, it would seem, had never been able to turn a profit in her business. She hid this fact from the world, seemingly due to shame, and when her failures were brought up to her, she would repeatedly allege that certain things got in the way of her success, that were beyond her control. There was one instance where she went so far as to allege that her husband was purposely holding her back in some nebulous way, as he was insecure about her success. Eric, on the other hand, did incredibly well for himself. He was the main breadwinner, and for a significant part of their relationship, had no problem allowing his wife access to their funds. However, in the years leading up to his untimely death, that began to change. In order to appear successful or to maintain a lifestyle she'd become accustomed to, Kouri began to steal funds from her husband's business accounts. As time went on, the relationship continued to falter. According to police documents and court records, Kouri began an affair with another party, who is at this time unknown. He's repeatedly been referred to as her paramour, but little else is known about him and their relationship. Her defense team also alleges that Eric too began a relationship with another woman, although no evidence at this time has been shared besides a brief comment made during a preliminary hearing. In text messages with her boyfriend, Kouri would disparage her husband, claim that she would need to get out of the relationship, and stated that divorce was not an option for her. Before their marriage, they had signed a prenuptial agreement, deciding how the dissolution of their marriage would look, and it would leave her without any sort of spousal support or access to his funds. It also didn't help that because of her own precarious spending habits, nothing that they had acquired during the marriage had been put in her name. Eric had been incredibly successful prior to the marriage, having bought the home that Kouri would move into before meeting her, and the prenuptial agreement was put in place to protect his money and property. Though neither party believed that they would actually get divorced, and felt that the prenuptial agreement was just a formality, as Kouri continued to grow dissatisfied with the relationship, it would seem that she began to think about how to obfuscate the rigid legal document. She would tell her paramour that if she were to divorce Eric, he would turn her kids against her and leave her with nothing out of sheer spite. However, it's more likely that she would be left with nothing because she owed over $3.1 million on investments that she had made for her unsuccessful business, and no way to feasibly pay off said debt. Her text messages and other pieces of evidence indicate that she was beginning to feel like she was running out of time, given that her bank accounts were exhausted, and she had been heading towards a complete financial collapse. The state's case against her seemed to indicate that she was of the belief that if she continued to spend money, take out alternative lines of credit, and keep up appearances, that at some point, her luck would just turn around. But that was far from the case. Eric had stopped trusting her with the funds that he brought in after he found that his wife had taken out a $250,000 home equity line of credit and spent it, then withdrawn $100,000 from his bank accounts without him knowing, and spent more than $30,000 of his credit cards without his knowledge. And to be clear, these amounts were taken over time, so that Eric would not notice how much money was being taken. Kouri had also forged Eric's signature in order to take out a second mortgage on the home, as it was solely in his name. Upon discovering Kouri's theft, Eric's view of his wife completely shifted. She'd been able to sleep soundly next to him for years, all the while stealing thousands upon thousands of dollars from his businesses. She had put them in a perilous financial situation, all to appear more successful, and she didn't really seem to understand why he would be upset with her. This violation was enough to break the trust between the two, so much so that he began to look into divorcing her. However, cutting Kouri out of his life wasn't as simple as just leaving. He didn't want his sons to grow up without their mother, and especially didn't want them to be caught in the middle of what would have been a very contentious divorce. But the trust between them was absolutely broken. He seemed to realize that she had everything to lose if they got divorced, and stood only to gain if he were to die. and while he would have never thought she was capable of murder earlier in their relationship, it seemed clear that he didn't actually know the person he was married to at all. With that in mind, he changed his will without Kouri's knowledge to make his sons the sole beneficiaries of his estate when they came of age, and placed his sister as the executor of his estate. The financial fraud and theft left Eric with the belief that he didn't actually know the woman he married, and that if she were capable of stealing so much money from him without breaking a sweat, she was capable of anything, including murder. This would mean that if he were to die, the marital home, the finances, and every insurance policy that he had would go to his sister and not Kouri. Gotcha. It should also be noted that as of recording, Kouri's defense team is now claiming that she was aware of this change and had no issues with it, but more on that in a bit. As pressure began to mount, it would seem that Kouri would begin to devise a plan to murder her husband. This plan began to take form over 7 years, as between 2015 and 17, Kouri would take out 4 different life insurance policies on her husband, without his knowledge, totaling in a nearly $2 million payout in the event of his death. This did not include his company's life insurance policy, which would bring the total to $4 million. Over this time, Eric would allege that Kouri had tried to kill him multiple times. According to court documents, while on a trip to Greece with the family, he became violently ill after drinking something that Kouri had given him. According to the initial arrest affidavit, Eric immediately felt as if Kouri had poisoned him, and said as much to multiple parties, including Kouri herself. She tried to calm him down and insisted that his reaction had to have been a simple reaction from something he ate, but he didn't believe her. At time of recording, the prosecution have not released any information indicating that this was an active attempt on his life by Kouri, and she has not been charged with attempted murder in this instance. However, given how Eric would go on to perish and Kouri's general MO, we thought best to include it. The prosecution alleges that her first attempt on Eric's life would take place on February 14, 2022. Kouri would allegedly attempt to poison Eric on Valentine's Day, when she poisoned the breakfast sandwich she brought to him. Prior to this occasion, she had asked one of the people who cleaned her real estate homes to obtain fentanyl for her. Police records indicate that this was not the first person she had asked, but the only person to actually provide her with the drugs. After eating the breakfast sandwich, he told multiple people that he was feeling ill, that he needed to go to the hospital, and that he believed that his wife had done something to him. Again, the trust in their relationship was so broken that he felt, even with no direct evidence, that she was trying to kill him, and went so far as to leave a record of that fact. At the same time, he texted Kouri and told her that he wasn't feeling well, but she hand-waved his mysterious sickness as simply being a bad reaction. She told him that he needed to lie down and take a nap, likely with the hopes that he would perish in his sleep. Eric seemingly took her advice, but not before using his son's EpiPen and drinking a bottle of Benadryl, and as she believed her husband was dying, Kouri then spent the remainder of her day with the man she was having an affair with. Eric passed out, only to come to a few hours later and drove himself home, much to the annoyance of Kouri. This was something that she seemed to have planned for a significant amount of time, given the dates of the insurance. She took special care to make sure she wasn't at the scene of the crime, that she came across as a loving, caring partner, and the hardest part was over, as far as she knew. But then he survived. Ugh, my day. After this, according to the evidence that has been made available, she told the person who had procured her fentanyl the first time that she needed more, specifically the kind that Michael Jackson took, directly implying that the drugs she had originally obtained were not strong enough. On March 4, 2022, Kouri stated that Eric and her had been celebrating the purchase that she made of a mansion, which evidence shows that he was against. She then recalled that she made Eric a Moscow Mule, which he drank in their shared bed prior to dozing off. She then told investigators that she went to sleep in one of her son's rooms because he had a nightmare. Kouri would claim that she didn't have her phone at this time, as she had left it charging on her bedside table. However, according to her phone's records, it was locked and unlocked multiple times, and sensed her walking throughout the house when she claimed she was asleep in her son's room, and showed that she had sent and received multiple messages. These messages were found to have been deleted prior to the police arriving at the home. While these lies are by no means damning under any other circumstances, the fact that Kouri, a supposedly grieving widow, would lie the night of her husband's untimely death would raise significant red flags for the investigators, but these were just the first to be raised. She then told officers that around 3 a.m., she woke up and made her way back to the bedroom. When Kouri laid down, she, quote, tried to cuddle up to Eric, and felt he was cold, at which point she called emergency services. The 911 operator asked Kouri to try and revive her husband by performing CPR, which she claimed to have done. However, when emergency services arrived, they noted that there was no sign that the life-saving measures had been performed. His body had been moved to the floor at the foot of the bed, but otherwise he seemed untouched. Upon news of his passing, Eric's friends and family all reached out to law enforcement and told them that they felt that Kouri was involved. They told investigators that Eric had been planning on divorcing Kouri, that he had repeatedly stated that she was going to kill him, and that if something happened to him, Kouri was probably behind it. Their statements were later validated when the police uncovered multiple text messages of Eric saying the same thing, and found out that Eric had changed his will to exclude his wife. When Kouri was talked to at the scene, she seemed eager to help the police. She told them that Eric had not been an avid drug user, that he only used weed gummies in order to go to sleep, and recounted how they had had drinks together before going to sleep separately. But many things stood out to the investigators right away. First was the fact that Kouri had obviously not done CPR on her husband. If there was the slightest chance that Eric could have been saved, why hadn't she taken it? Why did she seem averse to saving his life in any meaningful way? The second, and the most damning, was there was absolutely no sign of Eric having used drugs in the home. Eric was dosed with 5 times the lethal limit of fentanyl, and none was found around his person. To be plain, when a person overdoses, they don't have the capacity to clean up after themselves. Usually, evidence of their drug use is found directly around them, and crime scene investigators can follow their last movements from where they took the drugs to where they perished relatively easily. But there was nothing in his direct surroundings or even the house proper that showed that Eric had ever used fentanyl. This would mean that if Eric had taken the drugs himself, Kouri had cleaned up after him and eliminated evidence, or, more likely, that he'd been drugged by her. Despite Kouri currently stating that she was well aware of the changes made to the will, in the days following Eric's death, his sister came to the home and found that Kouri had hired a locksmith to try and break into Eric's safe. She had no right to the safe, nor to the home itself, and Amy told her as much. Amy also inquired as to why Kouri hadn't simply asked the family for the code, at which point Kouri attacked her. She lunged at her sister-in-law, punched her in the face and neck, and it took 4 full-grown men to get the widow off of her. After this attack, Kouri hired an attorney to sue her husband's trust so that she could have access to his life insurance policies and be in charge of what would happen to his remains. It should also be noted that despite Kouri's story being that she had closed on a multi-million-dollar mansion the night of Eric's death, she wouldn't have been able to afford the purchase without his life insurance payouts. According to the prosecution, the main motive for Eric's murder was financial, so when Kouri found out that she'd been barred from any of Eric's finances, the murder was rendered ultimately pointless. But because she wasn't able to access the money as she had planned, she quickly threw together a memorial fundraiser in Eric's memory, with all the proceeds going directly to her. She also banned his side of the family from attending, stating that they had attacked her after his death, and portrayed herself as a grieving widow who was being unduly criticized by her in-laws. After that, Kouri thought of a new way to profit from Eric's death. She paid a service to ghostwrite a book for her, titled Are You With Me?, which was meant to help explain unexpected loss and grief to young children. She went on a small book tour around Utah to promote it, but only a year after Eric's death, she would finally be arrested. Kouri spent the year trying to find ways to recoup the profits that she believed were owed to her after Eric's death. All the while, the investigation toiled on. They were able to easily ascertain that Kouri and Eric's relationship was slowly coming to an end, and that she alone stood to gain from his death. Over that year, they had found that Kouri was in a tremendous amount of debt, as well as carrying out an affair for some time, and had a second secret cell phone in which to communicate with other parties. This was found almost immediately, as when the police compared messages on Kouri's phone with the messages from Eric's, they found plenty of deleted conversations she had hoped to keep from them. But it wasn't just the text messages between her and her husband. They were also able to find messages with her paramour, as well as her mother and other friends, that indicated some knowledge of Eric's approaching death. One of the most damning messages recovered was a message Kouri allegedly sent to her lover the week Eric died, which stated that she just needed to wait a little bit longer before they could be together. She told him that he just needed to wait until Friday, the exact day Eric passed away. Her paramour had not deleted the messages though. The last time we covered Kouri, she had just been caught trying to get coercive witness tampering letters out of prison by holding them up on video calls with her mother. Colloquially, these papers are known as walk the dog letters because that is what she wrote on the top of them, in order to disguise their actual purpose. As the majority of you are well aware, all communication going in and out of prison is looked over, including letters, calls, and video calls, meaning that there is no way for Kouri to talk to her family without the prosecution knowing what she said. The only private communication she would be afforded is the privileged communication with her lawyers, which would also become relevant in a moment. But Kouri attempted to find a way to skirt around that fact. In the video calls, she talked to her mom as usual and held up the letter, seemingly in the hopes that the entire call would not be properly looked over. We read the letters on the channel, but if you don't recall their content, contents, she was telling her mother that she needed to get more witnesses to confirm her story, and told her to apply pressure on her brother so he would claim to have witnessed her husband partaking in illegal substances, which is a clear-cut example of witness tampering. Her legal team had been upfront with her that her story lacked any credibility, given that she was the only person who seemed to know that her deceased husband had a significant drug problem. Eric would regularly use cannabis gummies in order to go to sleep, and was open with friends and family about that fact. But had he had a significant drug problem with something as serious as fentanyl, there would be some kind of trail indicating that. In the year-long investigation into his death, the police found no evidence of him buying drugs, no unaccounted bank withdrawals that could be explained by illicit drug use. His friends had never witnessed any odd behavior, and, the most damning piece of evidence, no drug paraphernalia was found on his person the night he died. To put it plainly, when a person dies from a drug overdose, especially one that was 5 times the lethal limit and would have resulted in him losing consciousness rapidly, they don't carefully clean up after themselves. They don't skillfully hide any evidence in a manner that a crime scene investigator wouldn't be able to find, because they physically would be unable to. According to Kouri's statements to police, she had made Eric a Moscow Mule in celebration of her closing on a home, which the majority of people believe contained fentanyl, but no evidence of this drink was ever found. She told her mom to tell her brother exactly what to say and provided him with an entire false story about how Eric would go to Mexico for work and buy thousands of dollars of illicit drugs, then take them home with him, and how he hadn't come forward with this information prior in order to preserve Eric's memory. She also tried to puppet her own positive PR from prison, telling her mom that she needed to orchestrate her friends going on the news and speaking up about what a terrible person Eric was. This included a story about how when the family was on a vacation, he repeatedly put drugs in her carry-on and suitcases in order to try and get her arrested, because he thought it would be funny, but there's no evidence of this actually occurring. In response, Kouri's former attorneys claimed that the letter was privileged, as other notes found alongside it included her defense strategy, and therefore should not have been given to the prosecution. This line of defense was then debunked by Kouri herself, as she told her brother on another video call that the letter was really a story she was writing loosely based on her real-life experience. You've likely noticed that these two things cannot be true at the same time. If the walk the dog letters are privileged communication with her attorneys and are only meant to be shared with them as part of their defense strategy, then they cannot be a fictional manuscript. However, the manuscript lie was likely thought of prior to her talking to her legal representation and coming up with the better argument. As mentioned, this version of events was put forward by Kouri directly while on a recorded call with her brother, and was put forward with the express purpose of keeping him on her side. Kouri's motive for this lie wasn't to put forward an argument that would be brought before the court, or to be held up to basic scrutiny. Rather, she wanted to keep her brother on her side, and loosely excuse what was found in the walk the dog letter. You've likely dealt with this in your personal life in some capacity, where you catch someone doing something they otherwise shouldn't be, and then they try to lie to get out of the situation. This lie was likely not well thought through, but it's meant to buy the other party some time before they can come up with something better. Secondly, it should be noted that if the documents are in fact privileged, by holding them up during a recorded phone call with her mother, someone who was obviously not her attorney, she was sharing them outside of the scope of that privilege, and it could be argued that the documents no longer are. After the walk the dog letters were made public, and channels like mine reviewed them, Kouri's brother would talk to the press, which we will be going over now. In our coverage of other cases, we've gone over how talking to the press outside of lawyers is almost always a terrible idea, and that also applies to families of the defense. Even if they are well-intentioned, they will likely say something that makes the defense look worse, or make their job harder, which is counterintuitive. But that's not the only problem for Kouri. The letter specifically outlined how she wanted her friends and family to drum up positive PR for her, and how they should talk about the man she is alleged to have murdered. For them to actually follow the direction she had previously provided, all the while denying that those letters were witness tampering at all, hurts her defense. But let's watch.
I'm Ronnie, Kouri's brother, here with the rest of our family, my sister-in-law, Mindy, my mother, DJ, my beautiful wife and sister.
You can look at me too if that helps.
Yeah.
Would that help if you give one person? Okay.
Just getting really worried for Kouri, for her emotional state at this point. She is being isolated from talking to almost everyone. She's not being allowed to have visits right now. Getting really worried with the way that she's being treated in there. We're doing our best to keep her, her spirits up as much as we possibly can. But at this time, we're just hoping and praying that she's staying strong and that we get through this as quickly as we can.
Pausing for just one moment, but it's important to note why Kouri was being isolated from visiting her friends and family. This interview happened shortly after the walk the dog letter was found, which shows clear intent to coerce Ronnie and others close to Kouri to give false testimony on her behalf. At the time, the matter was still being argued, but the court had to restrict visitation from Kouri due to her own actions. This is just the consequence of her action, but how Ronnie frames the matter is important. He neglects to state why her visitation has been taken away, or why they cannot see her one-on-one, and instead points to the consequence as being the inciting incident, which makes it seem unfair. If you don't know anything about this case, and simply happen to turn on the news for this interview, you might be left thinking that Kouri is being unduly attacked and isolated, even though that's far from the case.
Can you talk about her relationship with her children?
As of right now?
Yeah, and in general too.
As of right now, she gets 30-minute talks twice a week. Recently, they've been recording them for some reason, and that's about it. She misses her boys more than anything, and they miss her too. And being away from her, I think, is really taking a toll on her, or on them, excuse me. And it's becoming quite apparent.
Which is once again her own doing. As for why the time with her children is now being recorded, that is still her doing. Kouri has shown that she will try and outsmart the prosecutors and the justice system at large to try and get her way. She will try and smuggle Crest White strips into prison and get witness tampering letters to her mother, so she is not beyond trying to give her children a message to take to their grandmother. Any trust they had with her to act responsibly was destroyed, and this is a direct consequence of that.
The allegations, they're hard to listen to, but at the same time, I know that they're just that. They're just allegations. They have nothing substantial on her at all. If and when this actually goes to trial, I have complete confidence that we have all of the proof to disprove everything that they're trying to claim.
Let's run this out for a moment here. Ronnie says that everything that has been said about his sister isn't true, and there is no substantial evidence against her, which is strange because we've gone over all the evidence in our videos. Kouri was texting her paramour shortly before Eric's death that things were changing, and he just needed to hold on until Friday, which is the night Eric died. She took out multiple life insurance policies on Eric without him knowing. That totaled the amount she would need to get the new mansion she wanted and get her out of debt. Multiple witnesses came forward and showed direct evidence that Kouri wanted them to get her fentanyl twice, and that was prior to both attempts on Eric's life. And she wrote about the attempts on Eric's life in a journal. There is a frankly overwhelming amount of direct evidence in this case that whenever we have stated allegedly in our past videos covering her, we've been criticized by a significant amount of viewers. But either Ronnie knows what he's saying is false, or he sincerely believes his sister's version of events, which has caused him to completely discredit anything that has come to light.
What do you have to say about the letter that the state's really going after?
I think they're going after that pretty hard. I don't really have that much to say about it. From what Kouri explained to me, it was just a fictitious letter. I don't have a whole lot to really say about it. I think they're trying to harp on that quite a bit because it obviously makes her look bad, even though there's several explanations for it.
So at this point, Ronnie parrots the line about the letter being a work of fiction, which completely destroys her attorney's argument that it is privileged information and therefore should not be seized. But he says something here that stands out, which is widely overlooked. In his defense of his sister and the letter, he states that there are, quote, many explanations for the letter, as a way to assert that it's not as important as what the prosecution believes, which means he has heard multiple explanations for this one document, even though there should really be only one. People tend not to tell multiple excuses and explanations for something when they're telling the truth. Rather, they tell one version of events and stick with it. However, when someone is lying or trying to manipulate another party, they usually throw multiple things at the wall to try and see what sticks. It's a book. No, it's a fictional letter. It was privileged information, and so on. Usually, if you're talking to this person one-on-one, they will throw out these different explanations in such rapid succession that you don't immediately notice the changes and shifts, but they are attempting to see which version of events you respond the best to. In summation, there shouldn't be multiple explanations for this one document, and Ronnie stating that there are is a massive red flag.
No, not at all. I've been outside of my mom and the closest one to their family, and trust me, I know everything that went on there. I don't need to be said or convinced to say anything that's not true.
When did you first hear about the letter?
I heard from it right after it got reported. One of the reporters in Park City called me and started asking me about it. Didn't know what he's talking about, and started looking into it right after that. But that one kind of took me by surprise. Him calling and not really understanding what was going on, and then obviously the phone started blowing up after that. So,
Ronnie, why are you so certain that Kouri did not do this?
Because I know my sister. My sister, she can't even squash a spider. She loved Eric. She loved her family more than anything. And I hate to say that, unfortunately, she's being painted in this light for really bad reasons, really selfish reasons. And so, we've got to get through that. Again, I know my sister very, very well, and anyone that actually knows her knows that she's just incapable of doing that. Sorry.
His defense of her is simply because he knows her, and knows she wouldn't hurt a fly. However, as we have already addressed, Kouri was found guilty of assaulting her sister-in-law days after Eric's death, so the very idea that Kouri was such a good person that she would never hurt anyone is just objectively false. Moreover, Ronnie continues to allude to the fact that the evidence is not on the prosecution's side, and goes further to say that Kouri is being penalized for selfish reasons, which frankly makes no sense. So far, neither defense team has shown any evidence that the police department was determined to pin the blame for Eric's death onto her, and they've shown no motive to do so. We've covered cases in which the police do wrongfully and maliciously target individuals, and while that is true in some cases, it does not appear to be true in this case. Just because the evidence is not in Kouri's favor does not mean it's wrong. The defense needs to show malice, they need to show corruption, and they need to show motivation, and they have not.
How would you describe her relationship with Eric?
They're great. They've been married for a long time, had some ups and downs, like everyone that has been together for a long time, but up until very recently, next to his, just before his passing, they were in the best spot that I'd ever seen him in. So, yeah, no, they were wonderful.
That statement alone goes against absolutely everything Kouri has said herself, and that she was trying to get him to say in the Walk the Dog letter. It's also not factually accurate. According to the prosecution, Kouri was stepping out on Eric, and according to the defense, he was also engaging in an affair. He had talked to a divorce attorney, he had taken multiple steps to remove her from his will, and so on. But it's obvious as to why he would want to repaint the narrative and general image that is being painted of Kouri and Eric's marriage. The marriage falling apart and Kouri being afraid of losing access to Eric's finances in the wake of her financial demise is being presented as the driving force behind her actions, so he is trying to say that they were actually fine, even though there is direct evidence that that is not the case. At this point in the interview, it seems as if Ronnie has genuinely not looked into the case against his sister, and is just taking her word for everything, which is a terrible idea.
Yes, yeah, she knows what's happening to her is unfair, it's not right, and she wants to help defend anyone else being put into her situation unfairly.
So if Kouri did not do this to Eric, how do you think Eric died with that fentanyl?
My thoughts on it is accidental overdose. That's my opinion. Could have been a number of things, but that seems to be the simplest answer to me, and that's typically what the right one is. The simplest answer is typically the correct answer.
Again, Eric had 5 times the lethal limit of fentanyl in his system, which is far more than what would have been used accidentally, especially if Eric was, as Kouri claimed, a frequent drug user. If Eric took hard drugs as often as claimed, the amount would be high, but not nearly as much, because he wouldn't have been trying to take his own life. Moreover, no evidence was found that he ever at any point purchased drugs, and when his body was found, there was no evidence of drug paraphernalia around him, meaning that for Ronnie's simple explanation to be true, Eric would have had to stumble upon a massive supply of fentanyl, taken it accidentally one night, and then cleaned it up so effectively that no one, not even crime scene analysts that were specifically looking for it, could find any trace of it, all before dying, which would have occurred in minutes, and objectively is not the simplest answer.
Does that surprise you? Did you know that he allegedly was into that, or would want to take the Okay, sorry.
There was a lot of talk today about kind of the public eye already trying this, coming up with a decision. Do you want to say anything about that? We're hearing from the family now for the first time.
Yeah, as far as the case goes, I am 100% confident in how this is going to go. My biggest fear that we have is really finding a jury pool that hasn't already been taken by the prosecution.
In past cases we have covered, this tends to be a sticking point with trials where a considerable amount of media coverage has been done. And while it will be harder, it is far from impossible. If you were to go outside and ask someone if they knew who Kouri Richin is, chances are high they would say no. Even in the immediate area they were in, people might have a loose knowledge of Kouri, but this case hasn't been so widely covered that it's impossible. But again, this is another tactic that can be used in order to try and paint the trial as being unfair and biased against her. So that's where the press conference ends, and it obviously did not go super well. Ronnie attempted to downplay the significance of the state's evidence. The comments of the video indicate that he was entirely unsuccessful, as every commenter who knows about the case believes Ronnie to have lied for his sister, the way the Walk the Dog letter told him to. However, there's another much more insidious reason as to why her family coming out to support her in this instance is not a great defense, and that is because her mother is now connected to a suspicious overdose that led to one of her partners dying, according to the Summit County Sheriff's Office. As of time of recording, she has not been charged in connection to this death, and information is limited, but the details of this death were revealed last March in a search warrant affidavit. This document detailed how in 2006, Kouri's mother Lisa was in a relationship with another woman who died unexpectedly of an oxycodone overdose. She died shortly after naming Lisa the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. Police records indicate that this woman did struggle with abusing medications like oxycodone, but based on the similarities to Kouri's case, as well as the fact that Kouri has attempted to use her mother as a sort of alibi or character witness in police interviews, many people find it to be too similar to be a coincidence. Kouri's own defense is being torn apart not by the prosecution, but by her and her original legal team, though Kouri has shown twice now that she doesn't understand that she's being recorded on jailhouse calls. She was not alone. One of Kouri's lawyers also refused to use the non-recorded line with the jail, meant to keep privileged conversations private between the attorney and the client. The attorney claimed to take issue with the app, and instead opted to speak to Kouri on the recorded line, which would be turned over to the prosecution for review. This is what happens all the time with jailhouse calls, so their inability to do the one thing that would prevent this is strange. This led to the prosecution having access to privileged information, not through any duplicitous action of their own, but simply by virtue of the lawyer's direct action. In response to the calls being rightfully turned over to the prosecution, Kouri's legal team argued that having access to all of these conversations was grounds for the entire prosecution to be removed from the case, as they had violated Kouri's rights. They seemed to blame the prosecution for having access to the conversations, even though it was that attorney's actions that led to that scenario. In response, the prosecution argued that they had not looked over these conversations beyond a few seconds, when they were made aware that it was communication between an attorney and a client. To be plain, the prosecution has done nothing wrong. The defense has not shown that they actually listened to the calls more than necessary to identify that it was privileged, and that lawyer should have known better. Many people online, including other channels discussing this case, have alleged that this was some sort of backwards plan by the defense, especially with the motion they filed to remove the prosecution. And while we don't necessarily find any real merit to that argument, it's easy to see why people would accuse them of that. It's an issue completely of their own making, so for them to try and remove the entire prosecution for it and argue they're the ones at fault feels far-fetched. But that's far from the only update for this case, as Kouri, once again, not understanding that everything she says on a recorded line can be used against her, managed to hurt her own defense by actively discussing her thoughts and feelings about her defense team's argument on non-privileged phone calls. On calls with both her mother and brother, she routinely spoke ill of her defense team, calling her head attorney, Sky Lazaro, a dumb bitch, and discussed how they were planning to move forward with the case. She went so far as to tell her mother that she had Googled Sky's address and looked at her home on Zillow in order to judge her worth as a lawyer. The majority of these conversations has not been made public at the time of writing. However, it's clear that due to Kouri's own actions, the prosecution is well aware of what that particular defense team would be planning to do. Her defense counsel filed a motion to withdraw at the same hearing they filed a motion to remove the prosecution from the case, citing an irreconcilable and non-waivable situation. What this situation is exactly we can only guess, as Kouri requested Sky smuggle her Crest White strips after she saw her appearance in court. and then was found trying to influence witnesses with the walk the dog letter, and went so far as to disparage her on a recorded line. Any of these actions would be enough for a motion to withdraw as counsel, but all of them make a fairly compelling argument. Shortly thereafter, Kouri took it upon herself to speak to the media, which was something that her lawyers had actively argued against. We've already gone over the issues with speaking to the press when we reviewed her brother's interview, but that was still separate from Kouri herself. She could still state that she had no part in that, despite the letters, and claim that that was what her family did in order to show a united front. But Kouri speaking for herself is an objectively awful idea. She's already dug herself into a fairly deep hole. Even ignoring the facts of the case and how much direct evidence is against her, her actions while in prison have not helped her in the slightest. Her actions make her seem controlling and unable to take any direction, even when it would benefit her. Her lawyer's job was to provide her with the best, most robust defense possible, but because their advice doesn't align with her own wants, she largely ignored it, then seemingly blamed them when her actions hurt the case. Kouri's defense relies on selling the narrative that Eric Richins was a drug addict, a bad husband, and a neglectful father, that his own actions led to his death, and that somehow he orchestrated his death in order to send her to prison, and in order to sell that version of events, she has to disparage him. But by repeatedly disparaging the deceased, she comes across as callous and strange, especially when all the direct evidence in the case discredits her depiction of him. Again, there is no evidence that Eric used hard drugs, while there is direct evidence that Kouri had purchased fentanyl twice, both related to times where she attempted to murder him. The fact remains that only Kouri had the means, motive, and opportunity to kill her husband, and there is direct, unflinching evidence that she did so. So let's hear what she said to ABC4 Utah.
And it has been a busy day for Kouri Richins and her murder case. Just 3 days after her attorney, Sky Lazaro, withdrew representing her in her murder case, a new law firm has been appointed. And this comes just a short time after recordings of Richins in jail were released. Now, ABC4's Annika Johns joins us with the very latest in this trial.
To be able to speak out for the first time is terrifying, but is much needed. The world has yet to hear who I really am, what I've really done, or what I really didn't do.
From behind bars, the Utah woman accused of poisoning her husband is breaking her silence for the first time. In audio released to ABC4's affiliate, ABC News, Kouri Richin shares words of her innocence and is asking for the world to give her a chance.
Give me a chance to prove it to you. Let me show you the facts. Let me show you the evidence. I will not give up. I will not give in. Please, just give me a chance.
The audio was released just days after her attorney Sky Lazaro filed a motion to withdraw from representing her.
Okay, this is 231-500-139, State of Utah versus Kouri Darden Richins.
Today in court, a brief hearing was held where Richins' former attorney was officially relieved of her duty.
Ms. Lazaro, your motion to withdraw is granted. You are being removed as counsel from this case.
And now Wendy Lewis, Catherine Nestor, and the team at Nestor Lewis PLLC are the newly appointed faces tasked with representing Kouri Richins.
We have a newly appointed indigent defense counsel, Ms. Lewis.
According to the law firm's website, Lewis and Nestor started practicing law together in 2022. And now moving forward with this case, the two of them have been given time by the judge to get familiar with the case. He canceled and rescheduled the preliminary hearing originally set for June 18th.
We are staying any briefing deadlines related to the motion to disqualify or the motion to suppress.
The motions the judge is referring to are first the motion to disqualify state prosecutors from the case. The second is a motion to suppress the 6-page walk the dog letter the Summit County Sheriff's Office located in Richin's jail cell late last year.
What I've really done is protect Eric at all costs. What I really didn't do is murder my husband. I could not and would not ever do that to Eric or anyone for that matter.
That was ABC4's Annika Johns reporting.
But ABC4 Utah was far from the only media outlet to hear from Richins. According to KSL, Kouri sent multiple voice recordings to media outlets, stating that she was innocent and that she was being silenced. Quote, "They took an innocent mom away from her babies, and this means war. I've been silent for a year, ripped away from my kids, my family, my life, living with the media, telling the world who they think I am, what they think I've done, or how they think I've lived, and it's time to start speaking up." Then she alleged that the prosecution was violating her rights by prolonging the case, and stated that she believed they were doing so in order to hide their corruption, which means that she believes that all the evidence against her in this case was fabricated and planted by the police and prosecution, which would obviously lead to one asking the question, why? Why would the police and the prosecution in this case focus on Kouri to the point of breaking the law? If there was no evidence against her, why would they create it? Especially if it would be easier to simply say Eric died of a drug overdose at his own hands. In other cases we have covered where we are dealing with a person who has narcissistic personality traits, we've discussed how they will try and invalidate evidence because it doesn't align with their worldview. They view themselves as being too smart to be caught for their crimes, and would likely watch videos like this one and point out ways they would no doubt best the police investigation. They cannot recognize their own smaller wrongdoings in their daily life, so when it comes to the crimes, something for which they likely planned for a significant amount of time, they come up with an absurd justification as to why things happen. In the case of Robert Tellis, he was caught on security camera driving to Jeff German's home, walking to the side of the house where he killed the reporter, then washing his car after the event. Evidence was found on his home and work computer, showing that he was stalking the reporter, and he was the only person in German's life who had motive to kill him. Despite that, Tellis claimed that a realty company he was investigating had hired a hitman not to kill him, but to kill the reporter, and make it appear as if he did it. In court, Tellis claimed that the realty company wouldn't have benefited from him being killed, even though he was the person they had issue with, because his colleagues would have continued the investigation regardless. If he was charged with murder, they could properly discredit his accusations, which obviously makes no sense. He showed absolutely no proof of this company hiring a hitman. They had no missing funds, and whenever the direct evidence was shown, he claimed it was planted by the police, who were also corrupt, and even went so far as to claim the prosecution was getting money on the back end as well. And because Kouri cannot see her own wrongdoings in the same way, she is alleging that the same thing is happening to her, but there is no motive. Moreover, as we have covered throughout this video, Kouri has not been quiet while awaiting trial. In fact, most of the issues in this case have happened because of her. Sure, she has not directly contacted the media before now, but she has been trying to orchestrate her own press coverage while in prison, as we have seen. She went on to say, quote, I'm anxious. I'm anxious for my innocence. I'm anxious to get to trial, and I'm ready to give this one heck of a fight. She said the world has not yet heard who she really is, or the real facts of the case, and said it is time, quote, to do some serious damage control, who I really am, and all that matters, is a wife of Eric Richins and a mom to 3 beautiful boys. What I've really done is protect Eric at all cost. What I really didn't do is murder my husband. I could not and would not ever do that to Eric, or anyone for that matter. I'm asking the world to give me a chance. Give me a chance to prove it to you I will never quit. I'm ready to move forward. I'm ready to go to trial, and I'm definitely ready to prove my innocence. She also said in that article, although there is no surrounding quotes, that she was shocked and devastated that Lazaro and the rest of her legal team withdrew, stating that they had become like a family, which blatantly ignores the fact that she repeatedly disparaged her attorney on a recorded line. She frames the motion to withdraw as being shocking, as if nothing she has done has led to that result, which, as we have covered, is simply not true. Shortly after she released these statements, Kouri's new counsel once again advised her to stop speaking with the public, and the only new information we have received has been in the form of Kouri's preliminary hearings. In her first 2 preliminary hearings in August, the public was made aware of more evidence against Kouri, including a journal where Kouri made entries about her attempts on Eric's life. All that was revealed at this hearing was the fact that Kouri stated she would need a, quote, truckload of fentanyl to kill Eric, as the amount she had given him the first attempt was not enough. But most recently, Kouri was back in court for a hearing for a motion to suppress multiple pieces of evidence in the case. Specifically, they're arguing that the court should suppress the digital data in the case, which would include the phone searches for things like luxury prisons for the rich, multiple statements given by Kouri to police, and the walk the dog letter. The defense claimed that Kouri's phone was taken away from her without a warrant, and that when it was taken while they were executing a separate search warrant on the home, she was not properly informed of her rights. However, in court, both officers who were questioned in regards to this stated that Kouri voluntarily gave them her phone and provided them access to it without issue. They also noted that on multiple occasions they had spoken to Kouri without a lawyer present because they were not conducting an interview. The defense argued that these conversations were done without Kouri being Mirandized and outside of the presence of her lawyer. However, the officers stated that these were not interviews, as they didn't know if Kouri was a suspect or not at the time. As for the walk the dog letter, her lawyers are now arguing that the letter was obtained through an illegal search of her cell, and that it was in fact a manuscript for a book she was writing loosely based on her life, where she would eventually break out of prison and solve Eric's murder. They also alleged that the letter was found in a manila envelope that was addressed to her attorney, making the search a violation of attorney-client privilege. However, the jail staff stated that they found the document in an LSAT prep book. As of time of recording, we don't know if any of this information will be suppressed, but the trial itself is set to begin in late April, and my best guess is that we will be seeing Kouri take the stand. Kouri's actions are similar to that of Anthony Tott, Robert Tellis, and Ezra McCandless. She seems entirely unaware of how she comes across to others, and how obvious her lies are, and given that her arguments rely on only her knowing the real Eric, she will probably have to take the stand. With that said, let us know what you thought of these updates in the comments down below. Do you think she is guilty or innocent? Do you think that the prosecution and police are falsely pinning her for this crime? Let us know. As always, if there is a video you would like to see on this channel, or a case you would like to bring more attention to, leave it in the comments down below, or email us at dreading.official@gmail.com. Remember, stay safe. On a side note, after watching all the available courtroom footage, the judge in this case kind of reminds me of a Muppet. Didn't mean that to be insulting, but his mannerisms, the way he bounces up and down when he talks, and usually keeps his hands by his side is very Muppet-like. I like this because it adds a small bit of levity to the proceedings, but I'll try to remember to add a clip into this just to prove my point.
Continued preliminary hearing where the state is prepared to lay foundation under 1102 and the other rules that would apply to a preliminary hearing for the evidence that it wants to admit. Does that sound about right, Ms. Lazaro?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you need to change defendant's position at all with respect to exhibits 1 through 18?
At this point, Your Honor, we object to all of.
Anyways, stay safe.